possibilist is someone who believes that anything is possible and they go for it.
Not changing is just not an option.
I believe in change. I am a possibilist.
From climate change to racial justice, young changemakers in Europe are rallying for a just, sustainable, and equitable future. Often pioneers in their sector, these young and ambitious entrepreneurs are applying fresh ways of thinking to some of the world's most pressing problems. We applaud the effort of the European Commission and the Social Economy Action Plan that was announced just yesterday. It confirms our belief that non-profits, cooperatives, foundations, and social enterprises are a vital force in the creation of an economy that puts participation, people, and the planet first. At the same time, the Possibilists report we're about to present will show you that we have a lot of work to do in order to better support all the changemakers out there. We believe it is young people that play a particularly important role in the transition to a social and green economy. For one, they are typically the ones most heavily affected, whether it is by the pandemic, youth unemployment, or the climate crisis. At the same time, youth is a demographic which is truly holding industry leaders accountable and people in power, and are building critical masses of movements like never before in history. My name is Matthias, and I'm one of the co-founders of ChangemakerXchange, a global community of such young social innovators. And we are extremely lucky and privileged to have 3 members of the network with us today. Alex Holmes from the United Kingdom, Bontu Kuschke from Germany, who lives in Denmark at the moment, and Melanie Marcel from France. Rather than reading their biographies, I'd love to hear from them. Alex, Melanie, and Bontu, can you please share with us a bit about your journey as changemakers?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Melanie Marcel, and I was trained as a scientist. So I was not born at first to become a social entrepreneur, but what I lived in my personal work as a scientist actually really bothered me in the sense I was not finding anymore in my day-to-day work. And I created SoScience in order to shift the academia and the industrial world, the technical world, into creating more social and environmental impact. So I'm a young woman trying to tackle a huge industry, and we are now working in more than 90 countries. Our programs are all internationals, and we are working with some of the biggest companies and the research centers all over the world to change their practices and to make science a tool for the citizens. And so, yeah, we're making it.
Great to hear Melanie's story. My name's Alex, and I've really focused on the 11,000 hours that children and young people spend at school. And unfortunately, for 150 million children across the globe, bullying is something that they face in their school, and it obviously has a big impact on mental health. For me, I was affected by that issue of bullying, and the thing that was missing was young people being part of the solution, young people being able to feel empowered to stand up for themselves and for others. So I've created this program called Anti-Bullying Ambassadors, and it's very much about training young people to be those peer support ambassadors, those people that challenge harmful behaviours. And it's now in sort of 4,000 schools, also around the world as well. And it's all about really giving young people a voice and making sure that they are part of a really important process of shaping attitudes and changing behaviours.
And my name is Bontu. Thanks for inviting me here today. My journey as a changemaker started in 2013 when I co-founded a social enterprise called Über den Tellerrand. The main aim of Über den Tellerrand was, and still is today, in fact, to organize different community projects with people with and without refugee experience. So today that involves, for example, language buddy trainings, cooking classes, specific programs for families, and much more in more than 30 cities around Germany. But as Matthias mentioned, I'm not living in Germany anymore. I moved to Denmark a couple of years ago, and I'm now a PhD candidate at Copenhagen Business School. And what I do here is primarily two things. The first is that I conduct research on the experiences of people from marginalized groups within organizations, with a particular focus on harassment and discrimination in organizations. And the second is that I teach social entrepreneurship and innovation to master's students at Copenhagen Business School. So you could say that I get to work with some of Europe's future change makers and prepare them for their journey as social entrepreneurs and social innovators, which means both exploring the opportunities, but of course also the challenges that they might face. So overall, you could say that I've somehow over the years switched my perspective from being a change maker on the ground myself to now researching and also teaching future change makers.
We rightly celebrate the impact of young change makers that they're creating and take inspiration from them. But as we will show in a moment, having chosen this path is not at all easy. And it's really time to act. In 2019, 16 youth social innovation communities reaching many hundreds of thousands of young innovators globally joined forces and formed the Possibilists Alliance. Supported by the Vienna University of Economics, SAP Foundation, and Google.org, we conducted a deep study of 800 young changemakers from 137 countries, launched in June this year, asking them the deep questions about their impact, their needs and challenges, and what we can all do to support them better. Today, we are taking a deeper dive into the European context, including the data of 200 respondents from 32 European countries. In this report, we put a spotlight on the challenges of young social innovators who self-identify as belonging to a marginalized group as well. It is our strong belief that we need to overcome the systemic and structural barriers and discrimination some young people in Europe are faced with when engaging in our society's innovation, decision, and policy-making processes. Young innovators in Europe create impact around every single one of the 17 SDGs, but the highest proportion, 58%, work on SDG 4, education, which they see as the major lever for reducing inequalities and instigating change. Their main motivations are to mobilize others, contribute to global issues, and do something for their local communities. Now, to everyone watching, and particularly those in positions of power, we are really seeing a generation of young changemakers in Europe that are resilient, innovative, and intrinsically motivated to change the world and improve the lives of others. They believe a better world is possible and they act on it, but they're really struggling and they need our support. Challenge number one is financial insecurity. 61% of changemakers in our study experience a lack of personal financial security and cannot compensate themselves for working on their ventures beyond a symbolic amount. Only 1 in 5, that is 19% of changemakers in the study, can actually live off their work. For under 20-year-olds, the situation is even more dire. 78% cannot compensate themselves at all or only with a token amount. And women are 15% less likely to be able to compensate themselves compared to men. And for 81% of changemakers who self-identify as marginalized, even basic security, including shelter and food, is at least a big, big concern. We think that's a massive injustice that changing the world is such a precarious and vulnerable path to take. Imagine the power and impact we could have by freeing them financially and to be able to dedicate themselves to their ventures fully. Challenge number 2 is multiple simultaneous responsibilities. 59% say they're juggling various, often competing responsibilities and are being stretched thin, which means that instead of being fully able to focus on realizing their true impact potential, they have to do many things at the same time just to make ends meet. A whopping 78% of young changemakers have other ongoing professional commitments in addition to their ventures, most often not by choice. And now, last but not least, challenge number 3, and maybe the most shocking of all, is burnout. 61% of respondents report having experienced burnout. Among youth who are being marginalized, it is even 65% that report symptoms of burnout. Women report higher levels than men, and again, for under 20-year-olds, the number is the highest. 78% of the very young, under 20-year-old young social innovators in the study report that they need support in increasing their well-being. How can these young people reach their full potential, both for themselves and for the world, if they're crashing and burning out while trying to do so? Or, as Markus Sauerhammer of the Social Entrepreneurship Network Germany put it on Twitter this morning after reading our report, the current conditions and lack of support structures lead to burnout and self-exploitation among young social entrepreneurs. I am sure everyone watching this live stream would agree. We must change this. It's unfair. Bontu, Alex, and Melanie, I'd like to once more invite you to give us your perspective on these results. Are they at all a surprise to you or an all too common feature of your own journey as changemakers? Melanie, what is your interpretation of the data and how does the data resonate with you? What would be your main recommendations to us all and the wider ecosystem of social innovation to overcome them?
Well, first, I want to say thank you for making this report and for creating this data, because we really need data to be able to tackle these kind of issues. It actually resonates a lot. And I think a lot of change makers, we just know that's the state of things, but we need to have proof, in a sense, and to be able to support these voices. So just to give you a little bit of context on my personal journey in terms of financing, which was your first challenge, I personally could not make a living out of my work for the first 2 years. And then I was still struggling between many jobs and many access to different finance in order to be able to live for at least 3 other years. So it took me 5 years to be able to actually make a living out of what I was doing. And so for me, this first point is what creates then the burnout. Burnout is one of it, and the juggling between different jobs, different responsibilities, because you have to actually do several things in order to be able to sustain yourself, only that. And so this is a big point in my opinion. And in terms of recommendation, I would say it's not always just about giving money, because when you say finance is an issue, maybe the first thing that organization might think is that it will cost a lot of money to actually help all those change makers in accessing some finance. But it's not the only thing you can do. For me, the main thing, really the main decision that can be taken is to give a better access to opportunities. So that means giving better access to decision makers, giving better access to markets, for example, really opening doors to these change makers. Because what we are proposing and the businesses we are creating are full of solutions. And so if we are able to talk about this solution, to create with others, to really shape policy with policymakers, what we are doing will actually spread. And we have, most of the time, changemakers have a sustainable business model. So it's only a matter of being known and of being able to propose those solutions. And it's a trouble, I know very well, because in one part of the science job is to actually connect scientists to social entrepreneurs, because social entrepreneurs don't have access to this word. And actually social entrepreneurs and change makers in general, and especially when they're young, have access to nothing that is out of reach. So for example, the scientific word is extremely out of reach for them. And it's not the only thing. Market, financial support, etc., etc. So for me, access to opportunity is the most important thing.
Thank you so much, Melanie, for sharing your perspective, and sorry for all the hardship that you've been going through, especially knowing all the beautiful work that you do. Thank you. Bontu, your current work focuses on investigating harassment and discriminatory practices in organizations, also in your very, very important PhD research that you're currently doing. What does the data mean to you when thinking of groups that are being marginalized, underrepresented, or discriminated? Can you give us your perspective on that? And please feel free to also comment more broadly on the data that was just presented. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I can only follow Melanie in saying that the results do resonate a lot. Being a change maker myself and working with particularly people from marginalized groups, they do not necessarily surprise me, so to say, the results, but that does not make them less shocking. And even more so, I think it means that we really have to address these issues. And I think I would like to pick up on 2 points that struck me as particularly important for us to notice and to think about further. The first one is that we need to realize, and I think the study really helps us here, that it's not only worse for marginalized communities, but that there might be particular difficulties that we have not considered yet, or that we would not even see if we don't ask about them specifically. So if we take the example of financial security that you mentioned, we heard that over 61% lack personal financial security, which is already a lot. But then we also learned that 81% of change makers who self-identify as marginalized, they're lacking even basic security, which includes shelter and food. So this is not a situation where we can say, oh, it's just a little bit worse for those who are already marginalized, but now we're suddenly talking about people not being able to sustain the very basis of their lives. And what is detrimental about this is that if becoming a change maker as a person from a marginalized community essentially means that you are not able to afford food and housing, then how can we expect these people to continue working as social innovators? And what it means is that we will eventually lose their insights, their perspectives, their ideas, which is so crucial, because these are the people who know what the problems really are, for example, for marginalized youth. And we need those people to be part of developing solutions. We need them to be part of taking decisions. And that means that we need to dismantle the structural barriers that prevent them from doing that at the moment. And we need to recognize that these structural barriers are not only quantitatively worse, but they're also qualitatively different for people from marginalized groups. And that links to just a very brief second point, and this one is directly related to my work on harassment and discrimination, which is when we then start building new structures for those young change makers, we also need to think about how these might be reproducing different forms of inequalities and discrimination. So you mentioned the problem of burnout and how here women report higher rates of burnout. I'm sure we could look into numbers on harassment within social entrepreneurial ecosystems, and we would probably, unfortunately, find similar patterns where, for example, women, but also people of color, people from the LGBTQIA+ community, poor people, people with disabilities, would face higher rates of harassment and discrimination. And that's within the very structures that are theoretically built to support them. So overall, I would say let's take this study as a starting point for creating better structures and better support for they need that. And in this process, let's actively think about how different groups of people and communities will be affected differently, what different needs they have, and how we can address these as part of our efforts.
Thank you, Bontu, so much. I thought that was brilliantly put. I'm just gonna leave it as that. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Thank you. Alex, You initially started a youth-led venture yourself in the UK, the Anti-Bullying Ambassadors, which has become one of the world's largest movements around anti-bullying. And you're now part of the Diana Award. From the perspective of a big stakeholder in the social innovation ecosystem, what are your recommendations for how we can best address the challenges in the report? And again, please feel free to also comment on them a bit more broadly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the research is really welcome. Being at the Diana Awards, we are a legacy to her belief that young people have the power to change the world. And I think one of the key things is that sort of accessibility part of this. Not all the young people we work with will achieve the Diana Awards, but we do a lot of programs around social action. And I think one of the important things is making sure that there are the resources for change makers, entrepreneurs who want to know more about how to do good governance, how to achieve their aims. And we still see a lot of programs and initiatives which are sort of behind application processes or not open. And I think we'd love to see more resources freely available to help people who don't necessarily have the time or perhaps the skills to apply to be part of a program or initiative, and instead just want to access those resources straight away. And I think that's one of the great things about things like ChangemakerXchange, that there are a lot of freely available resources, and the community is there to help you. So I really believe in that. And wearing a couple of different hats, like one at the Diana Awards with a program that recognises young people for their efforts, as well as doing social action projects around online safety and harassment and bullying. I also have an advisory position with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation around the Sustainable Development Goals, which I know is something very big for Changemakers and was recognised in this report, particularly around education, Goal 4. So I think we need to make sure that there's more sort of visibility of that. And I think the nice thing about organisations like this is that they are helping to really elevate the position of what it means to be a social entrepreneur and the importance. And we need to see more of that sort of driven focus and that recognition in schools, so that young people know that it is an option, and then corporates and businesses can back that. And I think just the final point is probably around the burnout element. I think we are hearing more and more about how tough it is for those that are activists and social entrepreneurs to achieve what they want to achieve in a very different world that's changed largely due to the pandemic. And I'd like to see more accessible groups like ChangemakerXchange, I think, again, which has so many opportunities to connect with like-minded people, share some of those challenges, support each other, and understand what you can do to perhaps achieve some of those barriers that you're facing. So I think that's a really, really crucial part, having more communities there. And maybe it does all link back to this sort of accessibility bit, because there is still a little bit of an issue with the fact that to sort of access the best support and the guidance often are still behind initiatives that are not easy for everyone to get, whereas actually I think we want to be seeing it being made much more easier for anyone that's wanting to do something good in the world to access the right resources, the right connections. So definitely like to see more initiatives and organizations like ChangemakerXchange. I've benefited from going on a couple of those summits, and now regularly stay in touch with some of those individuals that are now CEOs, leaders of initiatives that are trying to make sure Black history is taught as part of the curriculum, or opening schools that are very different and empathy focused. So I've learned a lot, and I think it's been really important, particularly those times when I've found it myself challenging around things like burnout and challenges around governance and trying to do the best I can. Having access to communities and groups like this has been crucial for me.
Thank you so much, Alex. Bantu and Melanie, let's hope that this report shines a spotlight on your impact and on the impact of all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of change makers around the world, but also on the struggles. and that we can overcome them together. Besides the brilliant points raised by the three changemakers, the Possibilists Alliance has put together a list of 8 recommendations, which you can find at thepossibilists.org/Europe. And I just want to give you our key 3 recommendations. Number 1, governments and grant makers should provide more and make it more easy to access funding for youth to ensure their personal financial stability as well as that of their ventures. Money matters. Support networks should all include well-being and mental health support in their programs, and they should avoid placing additional or unnecessary pressure and demands on young social innovators through tight deadlines or strict reporting requirements. They're stressed out enough. Let's support them in different and better ways. Policymakers should give young social innovators a seat at the table by facilitating access to decision makers and places of power and influence. But really, our key message here is, just like it needs a village to raise a child, it needs an ecosystem to nurture a change maker. We are therefore calling upon the grant makers, capacity building and support programs, the incubators, the accelerators, the well-being initiatives and policymakers to come together and join forces. And I believe that our partner for the Possibilists, Google.org, in fact, has a really exciting announcement that I'd like Rowan to share with us very briefly.
Thanks very much, Matthias, and thanks so much to Melanie, Bontu, and Alex. I mean, I think the points you just raised are exactly the kind of things that we've been thinking about. As Melanie said, like access to opportunity. How do we make sure that those groups, as Bontu also said, the communities most affected, people who are underserved, that they have access to opportunity and they are empowered to create the solutions that are going to lead to a greener, more resilient and fair future. And then, as Alex said, the visibility and getting more organizations and companies involved to support entrepreneurs. And I think you just summarized there those takeaways: access to capital, access to support and collaboration, and strengthening the ecosystem. So yes, we are delighted to announce that we're committing 20 million euros in cash funding through a new Google.org European Social Innovation Fund to support underserved social entrepreneurs across Europe. And so we're really looking at how do we support the ecosystem in many countries across Europe, and driving, creating programs, and that will help build the capacity of underserved entrepreneurs, give them access to networks, upskilling tools, but also access to capital. So as part of that 20 million investment, we're going to be launching a fund with access to capital, both at the very early stage of those just starting up, as well as kind of the growth stage, and giving grant funding to support underserved entrepreneurs to start up and grow. So, really excited, I think, about the opportunity we have at the moment in using this moment in time just to shift how we're thinking and how we can think about the future, and really putting people and purpose and the planet at the center of our business goals. And I think that's the opportunity that young social innovators and social entrepreneurs can really make a huge shift for our future.
Thank you very much, Rowan. And as the Possibilists, needless to say, we're really looking forward to continuing working together with you on this initiative and many to follow in the future, making our ecosystem stronger, hopefully. One concrete way that we as the Possibilists Alliance want to go about this is through the Ecosystem Solutions Initiative. And our first effort is to aggregate all the support that exists out there already and make it easily available to innovators out there through a free-to-use, globally available digital database set to launch in February next year, in 2022. And to learn more and submit your offer, if you are a grant program, an impact investor, a capacity building program, a well-being initiative, please go to thepossibilists.org/support and see what we have to offer and become a part and hop on board. We can do this together. Now, we'd like to really say a huge thank you for all of you in the audience for taking your time and to be with us today. and thank you for caring about the issues. I'd like to extend my huge gratitude to Bontu, Melanie, and Alex, not just for their work, but also for being spokespeople for the wider ecosystem. Thank you for your perspectives. Thank you to SAP Foundation and Google.org for being really trusted partners and going this path with us. And, you know, let's celebrate these young changemakers and their stories, but let's start to really take their struggles more seriously and make their lives easier. We believe if we can help young people overcome these crazy obstacles, if you think of it, they're facing and fulfill their impact potential, we have a much, much better chance of successfully tackling the myriad of social and environmental problems that we're facing right now. So please do join us, check out the report, come aboard the Ecosystem Social Innovation Initiative, check out the new Social Innovation Fund by Google.org and by all the many other partners that are a part of this bigger initiative. And thank you very much, and see you soon.